They say life turns on a dime. Mine turned on a bean casserole. It was the second Saturday of the month, which in our little corner of Tennessee meant one thing: the neighborhood potluck at the community center. These things were as regular as a church bell and just as loud, full of smiling faces and people pretending to enjoy Randy Malden's poetry readings between lukewarm deviled eggs and passive-aggressive compliments. Judith, my wife of 7 years, loved these things. Said it kept her in tune with the community, which I always found ironic since she spent most of her time at them hiding in corners with a plastic cup of sweet tea and a plastic smile to match. But that evening she had a little more bounce in her step, like someone who'd just remembered where they buried the winning lottery ticket. I noticed it while she was putting on her earrings. Nothing flashy, just those little gold ones her mother gave her before she decided Florida was more her style than family holidays. Judith was humming. Judith never hummed. Not unless she was irritated and trying to drown out the sound of me talking. But this wasn't an annoyed hum. This was something else. Happy, almost melodic, like she was scoring the soundtrack to her own private rom-com. "You seem upbeat," I said, peeking into the mirror behind her. "I'm just looking forward to the potluck," she said, smiling at her reflection, not at me. "Besides, I made lemon bars." Oh, lemon bars. That explained nothing. At the potluck, we did our usual awkward laps. We greeted the Pattersons, dodged the Aldridges, and endured approximately 6 minutes of Randy's latest poem about the metaphysical symbolism of cracked linoleum floors. I'd just about escaped to the drinks table when I saw Judith across the room, talking to someone I'd never seen before. Tall guy, khakis, navy polo. Looked like the kind of man who alphabetized his cereal. He was laughing. Judith was laughing. I felt like I'd walked in on a joke that had been going on for weeks. Now, I'm not the jealous type. I'm not the suspicious type either. I'm more of the whatever's going on, I'm sure I'll hear about it 6 weeks later when it's too late to care type. But something about the way her hand lingered near his arm, not touching, just hovering, lit a fuse somewhere deep in the storage closet of my brain. One labeled, "Do not open unless you enjoy emotional disorientation." I went over, of course. Not because I thought anything was happening, but because I was suddenly parched and the drinks table was inconveniently located next to my wife and this man who clearly had opinions about vintage car restoration based on the way he kept motioning with his hands like he was fixing a carburetor midair. "Noah," Judith said, "this is Dennis." Of course his name was Dennis. He looked like the kind of man who corrected people's grammar via text. "Dennis moved into the old Langford place," she added. "Ah," I said, shaking his hand. "So you're the brave soul who thought, you know what this moldy 1960s ranch needs. My presence." Dennis laughed a little too hard. Judith gave me her "don't be weird" face, which I interpreted as a sign I was on the right track. Over the next hour, I played my role. The supportive husband, the polite neighbor, the guy who pretended to be interested in Sheila's Pinterest-inspired carrot salad even though it looked like it had already been digested once. Judith flitted around like someone running for a social office that didn't exist. And Dennis? Dennis managed to always be in the same room as her without ever looking like he was trying. It was subtle, annoyingly subtle. But then again, most meaningful things in life are love, heartbreak, the slow realization that your marriage might be more of a joint lease agreement with holiday obligations than anything resembling romance. It was around dessert time that things took a turn. I'd stepped outside for some air, or maybe just to get away from the relentless optimism of the retired couples comparing cruise packages, when I noticed something odd. A pair of shoes. Men's. Scuffed, dusty, definitely not from this potluck crowd where everyone dressed like they were hoping to bump into the mayor. The shoes were sitting under the bench outside the back door. Next to them was a hoodie rolled up like a pillow. Now, maybe that means nothing to you. But to me, that was the first crack in the paint. Because Judith hated shoes left out in public. She was a place for everything kind of woman. So seeing that made me curious. That night, after we got home and she was busy folding napkins like it was an Olympic sport, I mentioned Dennis again. "He seems nice," I said, watching her closely. "He is," she said, without missing a fold. "Very thoughtful. Didn't take you long to get chummy," I added, letting it hang there like a damp sock. She paused for half a second, just long enough to be noticed, then went back to folding. I didn't say anything more, but I remembered something Dennis had said when we first met, something Judith had quickly interrupted. He'd mentioned seeing her earlier in the week. But Judith had told me she was working late that day. Now, listen, I'm not saying I had some grand plan. I didn't become Sherlock Holmes overnight. But I started noticing things. Things I'd ignored before. The new keychain she suddenly had with no explanation. The tiny scratch on the back bumper of her car she claimed was from the grocery store parking lot, though we both knew she hadn't gone in weeks. And the way her phone suddenly lived in her purse like it was on the run from the FBI. So I did what any man who knows he's not built for sneaking around would do. I made chili. That's right, chili. With cornbread muffins, the way Judith liked. I set the table, poured us some wine, and smiled like a man who hadn't just read an entire string of Facebook comments between Judith and Dennis on a forgotten iPad she left logged in. Apparently, Dennis had opinions. About Judith. About the life they could have had. About things I didn't even know you could do in the back seat of a '99 Toyota Camry. But did I scream? Did I shout? No. I handed her a spoon. You all right? She asked, cautious. Just feeling grateful, I said, smiling. Grateful that we still have honest conversations and share everything. That's what marriage is, right? She blinked. For a moment, I think she genuinely forgot what the word honest meant. Later that night, she kissed me goodnight like nothing was wrong. Like our life was a postcard from somewhere warm and predictable. But I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about Dennis's khakis and those shoes under the bench. This wasn't going to be one of those stories where the wife sits you down and confesses through tears. Judith wasn't the confessing type. No, if I was going to get to the bottom of this, I'd have to be clever, patient, and maybe, just maybe, a little more sarcastic than usual. I had no intention of becoming a detective. I barely had the patience to sit through a 3-minute YouTube tutorial on how to fix a leaky faucet. But here I was, sifting through the digital breadcrumbs of my wife's extracurricular life, like some mid-budget crime show side character whose main trait is mildly observant. The thing that tipped it wasn't a lipstick on a collar or a receipt from a restaurant we'd never been to. No, it was Judith's calendar. Not her work calendar. Not the dry erase one on the fridge next to the meatless Monday magnet that we both pretended to respect. I'm talking about her second calendar. The one she kept in her office drawer under a bunch of expired coupons, and one of those inspirational notebooks that still had only 5 pages written in it, all of which said some version of drink more water or believe in yourself. Now, I wasn't snooping. That's what I told myself, anyway. I was looking for a pen. That's the level we're talking about. I just wanted a pen. And there it was. The calendar. A little black thing that didn't match the aesthetic of the rest of the drawer. Judith's usual taste leaned towards soft pastels and things with words like breathe in gold cursive. This one looked like something a librarian would carry if she moonlighted as a blackjack dealer. It was flipped open to March. Every Thursday was marked with the letter D, sometimes circled, sometimes underlined, once with a little heart next to it, which was honestly just lazy. If you're going to lie to your spouse, at least don't use the same doodles you used in 7th grade algebra. Now, Judith has never been a fan of ambiguity. She labels things. Rice goes in the container labeled rice. Not grains. Not pantry. Rice. So the vague D stood out. I flipped back. February. Same deal. Thursdays. D. Once, twice, every week. A few Tuesdays too, just to keep it spicy, I guess. December? Also D. Either Judith was taking the world's slowest course in basic piano, or there was a regular Thursday event I wasn't invited to. I closed the drawer and walked out of the room like I hadn't just discovered a breadcrumb trail leading straight into the forest of suspicion. I didn't ask her about it. That would have required a level of direct confrontation I wasn't prepared for. Plus, I was still pretending I was just a husband looking for a pen and not a man whose wife might be treating Thursdays like they came with a side of secrets. So I did what every tech-savvy, emotionally confused man in his late 30s does. I Googled how to tell if your wife is seeing someone else without sounding like an insecure man-child. Not a lot of helpful results, surprisingly. I tried a new tactic. I asked Judith what she was doing that Thursday. She said, "I've got errands after work." I asked, "What kind of errands?" She blinked, then rattled off a list that sounded like it had been pre-approved by a suburban committee. Dry cleaner, post office, picking up a gift card for her boss's birthday. The list was bland enough to seem safe, but detailed enough to feel suspicious. She didn't mention D. I let it go, Because the best way to get someone to tell you the truth is to let them think you're too clueless to deserve it. The next Thursday, I left work early. No big exit. Just told the guys I had some plumbing thing to fix. Not a lie, really. My trust was leaking all over the place. Judith left the house at 5:32 p.m. I waited 15 minutes, just enough time to make it seem like I wasn't doing what I was obviously doing, then got in my car and followed the least dramatic tale in history. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't dodging traffic. She was just calmly driving to a community center across town. Now, at this point, I was about 75% sure I was about to catch her doing something wildly unfaithful, and 25% sure I was going to find out she'd been leading a second life as a ukulele instructor for troubled teens. But what I wasn't expecting was what actually happened. Judith walked into a room. I parked 2 streets over and walked around to the side entrance. Through the windows, I could see a group of people sitting in a circle. There was a whiteboard with the words "Creative Expression for Professionals" written across it. A support group? Therapy workshop? Maybe this wasn't what I thought. Then Dennis walked in. Dennis of the potluck. Dennis of the always too interested laughter. Dennis of the khakis. He walked in, set his bag down next to Judith, and they did the thing that was almost more telling than kissing. They leaned into each other. Not the kind of lean you do when you're tired. The kind you do when you're familiar, comfortable, practiced. They didn't touch, but they didn't need to. I was suddenly looking at a pair of people who knew each other in ways that didn't involve group therapy handouts or whatever vague nonsense was on that whiteboard. They shared a look, a very specific one, the kind you don't unsee. And that was it. No dramatic kiss. No scandalous reveal. Just that look. I went home. I didn't confront her that night. Or the next. I let it simmer, the way soup does when you forget you left it on the stove, and now it's just boiling into something unrecognizable. The next week, I dropped a casual question into the conversation. Hey, whatever happened to that creative expression group you tried last year? She looked up from her magazine. What group? The one you went to on Thursdays. That support thing. Oh, that. Yeah, I stopped going. Didn't really click with me. Huh. Shame, I said. Sounded like it had potential. She nodded and flipped a page like we were talking about the weather, not erasing a relationship with an eraser dipped in nonchalance. That's when I knew for sure. Not because she lied, people lie, but because she didn't even care enough to remember the lie she'd told. That's worse somehow. I still didn't say anything. Because now it wasn't about catching her. It was about figuring out what came next. I wasn't going to play the angry husband. I wasn't going to beg for answers or chase down explanations wrapped in half-truths and sighs. I was going to watch. Wait. Let her think the water was calm. Because the thing about Judith is, she's smart. Smart enough to fool most people. But she's not clever. Clever remembers which lie she told about Thursdays. And me? I've got a calendar now, too. It started with a brochure about flooring. We had this stack of random mail that Judith insisted on sorting later, which, in our house, meant it would sit on the kitchen counter until one of us got fed up and threw half of it out without looking. I was flipping through it, avoiding doing the gutters, when I found the brochure. One of those local renovation companies, cheesy font, fake smiling couple on the cover, promises of transforming your space. Now, I don't get excited about hardwood options. I've walked on enough floors to know the only real difference between maple chestnut and cherry driftwood is how annoyed you get trying to clean footprints off them. But this one caught my eye because written in the top right corner was a date and a time. Handwritten. Tuesday, 11:15 a.m. I flipped it open. Inside, it had a little sticky note. Confirm if he's good for next week, written in a handwriting I recognized instantly. Judith's handwriting, which was suspicious for a few reasons, the first being that we hadn't talked about any renovations. Second, 11:15 a.m. on a Tuesday was not a normal time for Judith to schedule anything. Her work schedule was 9 to 5, rigid and predictable, like a bank safe with mild seasonal depression. So I took the brochure, walked into the living room, and casually asked her if we were redoing the floors. Judith looked up from her tablet, blinked like I'd asked her if she wanted to take up fencing. What floors? The ones you wrote about here, I said, tossing the brochure onto the ottoman like it was just another piece of junk mail and not a subpoena with laminate samples. Oh, that. No, I was just helping someone at work pick a contractor, she said, already shifting her eyes back to her screen like the topic had been handled and archived. That's considerate of you, I said, sitting across from her. Didn't know office assistants handled flooring referrals now. She smiled, tight and polite. You know how it is. People ask for help with all sorts of things. I nodded, said nothing, and watched as she scrolled through her feed like she hadn't just delivered a statement with the structural integrity of a wet napkin. That night, while Judith was busy watching a true crime documentary and pretending not to enjoy it, I sent a quick email to the renovation company. I used a fake name, said I was interested in a consultation, referenced the brochure with the 11:15 time. Took about 8 hours to get a response. They thanked me for my interest, confirmed that Dennis was indeed the consultant who had the appointment for that time slot next Tuesday. And yes, they could squeeze me in the following Thursday. Dennis. Naturally. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I had enough. The next morning, I laid out a new plan. It didn't involve yelling or throwing anything. It involved clipboard paper, office supplies, and a printer that took half a college fund to keep in ink. I created a fake survey, branded it with a fake logo. Community Living Trends and Lifestyle Assessment. It said across the top in a modern, friendly font I stole from a cereal box. Printed about a dozen of them, folded them neatly, and slid them into a manila envelope. That night, I told Judith that a local group was doing neighborhood studies and had dropped off a survey packet. Some kind of lifestyle metrics thing, I said while flipping through the TV channels. Wants both partners to fill it out separately. Then they compare your answers and give you a compatibility score. She shrugged. We're not signing up for anything weird, right? Nope. Just a survey. You get a free mug if you send it back. Judith, lover of discount mugs and arbitrary validation, was in. We sat at the kitchen table that Saturday morning and filled it out. Mine was fast. Hers took longer because Judith answers surveys like they might end up in a museum one day. I asked questions like, how often do you spend quality time with your partner? And have you ever concealed plans from your partner for personal reasons? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how emotionally invested are you in your current relationship? She didn't bat an eye. When we were done, she handed hers to me like it was a finished exam and went off to do laundry. I scanned it. She had marked herself a 9 for emotional investment. I gave myself a generous 3. We were clearly in different movies, and I was starting to wonder if I'd even been in the trailer. Monday came. Judith left for work. At 10:50 a.m., I got into my car. I didn't follow her this time. I drove to the community center again, parked, and walked in like I owned the place. I passed the room labeled Volunteer Committee, ignored the room with all the seniors playing bridge, and headed for the door marked Private Consultations. It had a small sign with the renovation company's name on it and a notice about scheduled appointments. At 11:13, Dennis arrived. He was wearing the same khakis. Like the guy had a signature style and no backup plan. He looked like someone who genuinely believed his shoe polish habits made him disciplined. He walked in, greeted the receptionist, and I watched as he pulled a brochure from his bag, the same kind as ours. I didn't approach him. I just waited. At 11:18, Judith arrived. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked casual, comfortable. She smiled, said something I couldn't hear, and followed him into the room like they were meeting to discuss grout colors, and definitely not whatever it was they actually did during these Thursday meetups. I left. Back home, I printed out her survey, wrote score, 9 out of 10, fantastic commitment to fiction, across the top, and pinned it to the fridge, just to see if she'd say anything. She didn't, but she did take it down after dinner. Carefully, folded it, and put it in her purse. Because even Judith, master of soft lies and calendar misdirection, understood the significance of being quietly found out. She didn't mention Dennis again, didn't bring up Thursday plans. Instead, she started asking about what I wanted to do for our anniversary. 8 years coming up. We should go somewhere nice, she said, flipping through her planner like there wasn't a flaming contradiction already smoldering on page 5. I nodded. Somewhere honest would be a nice change. She laughed, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. Judith believed she was still ahead of the game, which told me exactly how little she understood me after all these years. I wasn't angry. Not in the dramatic, throw things out the window way you see in movies. I wasn't even heartbroken. That ship had set sail weeks ago, probably on a Thursday, with Dennis at the helm and Judith waving from the upper deck. What I felt was more along the lines of curiosity mixed with mild irritation, like when someone borrows your tools and never brings them back, but then shows up smiling like they've just invented punctuality. That's how Judith acted around me. Smiling. Overly polite. suddenly interested in my opinions on things she had ignored for years, like water filters and home insulation. I didn't want to fight. I wanted closure, but not the kind you read in self-help books. I didn't need journaling or constructive communication. I needed balance. So, I came up with a plan. Not to hurt Judith, just to hold up a mirror and let her sit with the view. It started with the financial files. Judith wasn't good with numbers, which worked in her favor during arguments, but not when it came to tracking her own spending. I'd been handling most of our finances since year 2, when she'd accidentally paid the gas bill twice in 1 month and then blamed the utility company for being too absorbent. She meant aggressive, but I didn't correct her. The vocabulary battles weren't worth it. She didn't know I'd created a shared spreadsheet for our accounts that auto-synced to a cloud folder. Every time she used our joint card, it logged the purchase, categorized it, and saved a copy of the receipt if it was digital. It was meant for budgeting, but now it served a more personal purpose. I started relabeling certain entries with code names. Her lunches with Dennis were logged as dental checkup follow-up and consultant alignment meeting. I changed those to public rehearsals and Dennis appreciation hour. I did it slowly, methodically, just enough to make it seem like she'd done it herself during a particularly sarcastic mood swing. Then, I synced the spreadsheet to her email so it would send her weekly summaries. Her first reaction was confusion. She squinted at her phone, scrolled, then muttered something about weird formatting. I watched her try to recategorize the entries, but the changes kept reversing thanks to a hidden formula I'd added. Her next reaction was suspicion. She asked me if I'd updated the budget software. I told her I had, and it now used smart labeling based on behavioral analytics. I said it with such confidence, she didn't even ask for proof. Next, I printed a photo. Not a scandalous one. That would have been tacky and predictable. It was a group shot from the potluck, the one where Dennis had joined our table for a moment. In the background, you could see Judith. She wasn't touching Dennis, but the angle made it look like she was mid-laugh and leaning toward him. Innocent enough if you weren't looking. Telling if you were. I framed the photo and placed it in the hallway, right between our wedding photo and the photo of us in Charleston from a few years back. Judith noticed it 3 days later. "Where'd this come from?" she asked. "Community newsletter emailed it out," I said. "Nice shot, right?" She stared at it for a moment. I could see her doing the mental math, deciding if asking me to take it down would make things worse. She left it alone. Then I started being enthusiastic, helpful, supportive. Every time she mentioned a plan, I backed it, enthusiastically. When she suggested organizing the garage, I offered to handle it myself. When she said she might sign up for another class, I said, "Absolutely. Expand your horizons." She was visibly uncomfortable. My agreement made her unsure. She was expecting resistance. Guilt relies on conflict. Without it, there's nothing to push against. Just your own echo, getting louder. And then came the spreadsheet envelope. I printed out the financial summary from the last 3 months. But instead of labels like grocery or utilities, I changed every single category to reflect her new schedule. Thursday entries were renamed Dennis Performance Evaluation. Friday purchases, recovery snacks. Uber charges, denial transport services. I even highlighted them in pastel colors and added Judith's initials in the corner of each cell. I folded it neatly and left it on her side of the bed. When she found it, she didn't say anything for an hour. Then she asked, "What's this?" "Just a review of our recent spending. Wanted to make sure we're aligned." She didn't respond. She sat on the edge of the bed, scanning it like it was a breakup letter translated into Excel. That weekend, I went to my brother's house and stayed the night. Didn't mention it. Didn't text. When I came home Sunday, she had cleaned the house. Not her usual lazy loop-around clean. This was the kind of cleaning you do when you want to prove you still belong somewhere. Judith never mentioned Dennis. But on Monday, she called out of work. Said she wasn't feeling well. I asked if she wanted anything from the store. She said no. Tuesday passed. No appointment at the community center. I checked. Just a lonely clipboard on the counter with Dennis's name crossed out. No new one scheduled. I don't know if she called it off. Or if he did. I don't really care. That wasn't the point. The point was, she knew I knew. And I didn't need to scream, throw furniture, or take a dramatic solo walk in the rain. I just held up the facts, wrapped in sarcasm and neatly formatted cells, and let her figure out how she looked in the light. That Friday, she asked if I wanted to talk. I said sure. Let me just pull up the spreadsheet. She didn't laugh. We weren't the kind of couple who had long talks about feelings. Most of our deep conversations over the years had taken place during TV commercials or while stuck in traffic. Judith's version of opening up usually involved sighing in a way that suggested I should decode the message myself. So when she said, "Can we talk?" and did it without sighing or folding laundry at the same time, I knew we'd reached some sort of final stop on this scenic relationship tour. I sat down in the chair across from her, not next to her on the couch. The couch was for people who were still pretending they were on the same team. I brought a notepad, not because I needed to write anything, but because Judith hated when I did things that made it seem like I was more prepared than her. She started with, "I know you've been distant." I nodded. Geographically, not really. Emotionally, yes. But congratulations on finally noticing. She frowned. I meant, look, I get it, okay? I get that something shifted. That something being your loyalty. I offered helpfully. She winced, then straightened up. I think we should stop pretending that this is just about me. That was adorable. Truly. A+ for creative framing. All right, I said. Let's make a list. Top 5 reasons why this marriage turned into a performance piece. Judith looked like she regretted starting the conversation, but she'd already committed to the dialogue, so she powered through. She did that thing where she tried to sound logical and unbothered, while clearly one mild interruption away from losing the thread. You've been passive for years, Noah. You never engage. You let things slide. You detach. I detach, I repeated. Right. Is that before or after I handled all the tax filings, your dental insurance drama, and your mysterious allergic reaction to adult accountability? She glared at me. This is exactly what I mean. Everything's a joke. No, I said. Just the parts where I'm expected to play the dumb, oblivious husband while you're off doing your community service with Dennis. How's he doing, by the way? Still passionate about mid-range flooring and emotional outsourcing? Judith's lip twitched. She didn't answer the Dennis part. I didn't expect her to. Instead, she switched to her favorite fallback, rewriting history. When we first got together, you were more involved. We talked. We had plans. You cared. You mean before your calendar filled up with appointments that didn't exist and errands that required business casual whispering? She looked down, then back up. It wasn't about Dennis. I blinked. Is this one of those statements where I'm supposed to say I know, and then we hold hands like we're in a low-budget apology scene? No, I mean it. Things were already broken. I agree, I said. And like responsible adults, instead of, say, bringing it up and working on it, you added an extracurricular activity. Silence. Not dramatic silence. The awkward kind where both people know this is the part where something permanent has shifted and you can't walk it back because it's already in print. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I'm just saying I understand if you want out. Oh, how generous, I said. You understand. Thanks for the emotional permission slip. Noah, she started, but I held up a hand. I'm not staying, but I'm not storming out either. I'm walking out, like a human with a spine and a functioning calendar. I'll move into the guest room until I get the lease signed on the new place. Judith's face shifted. Not shock, not sadness. More like she'd just been told her go-to parking spot at work had been reassigned. Mild inconvenience layered with quiet self-pity. You're not even angry, she said. I was. About 2 spreadsheets ago. What are you feeling now then? Mostly grateful that I don't have to pretend anymore, I said. You know how exhausting it is to share a house with someone who lies about everything except the weather? Judith didn't respond. I'll handle the paperwork, I added. I'm sure you're busy. She nodded, slowly. This is really happening then? I stood up. It already happened. You're just catching up. I walked into the other room, not in a rush. Judith stayed where she was, staring at nothing, probably imagining some future version of this conversation where she came off more composed. That night, she didn't say much. She asked if I wanted anything from the store the next day. I said no. I didn't ask where she was going. She didn't offer. And that was the tone of our last few weeks together. Polite, quiet, like coworkers who accidentally ended up on the same project and were just trying to get to the end of the quarter without more drama. I boxed my stuff slowly, on purpose. Let her see the gaps in the closets, the absence of my keys on the hook, the empty side of the sink. I didn't leave angry letters or staged emotional artifacts. Just clean drawers and silence. She didn't beg, didn't apologize again. I don't think she knew how to without sounding like she was writing it for someone else. The morning I left, She handed me a list of things she said she'd cover until we figured out the house situation. I nodded, took it, and left it on the counter. Outside, the air was just air. No poetic symbolism. Just space. That's all I needed. Judith texted me 2 weeks after I left. Not a paragraph. Not some long, emotional outpouring about lessons learned or growth achieved. Just, did you take the charger from the nightstand? There it was. The final nail in the already well-sealed coffin of our marriage. A passive-aggressive accusation disguised as a tech query. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood in my new apartment, half-furnished, full of light, suspiciously quiet, and looked at the mess of cables on the floor. There were 2 chargers. I didn't know which one was hers. They both looked like they'd been chewed by time and ignored during cleaning. I picked one, stuffed it in a padded envelope, and mailed it back with no note. If she wanted closure, she could have it delivered by USPS, 3 to 5 business days. You'd think after everything, I'd be bitter, that I'd walk around with a cloud over my head and start dramatically sighing at coffee shops like a man rehearsing for a local production of The Betrayed Husband. But the truth was, I felt lighter. Not in the poetic, life-affirming sense. Just less interrupted. The apartment was small, sure, and the walls were thin enough that I knew way too much about my neighbor's blender habits. But there was no second toothbrush in the holder that I pretended not to notice. No shoes left in the hallway that weren't mine. No scent of someone else's body wash trying to act like it belonged in my routine. Just me, my stuff, and a sofa that was too firm but at least didn't ask passive questions during TV shows. I didn't miss Judith. What I missed was the version of her I used to believe in. The one I defended in arguments, praised to friends, planned around. That version was probably fictional, or maybe just expired. People change, after all. Some gradually, some in spreadsheets. I didn't go out and find myself. I didn't suddenly take up kayaking or enroll in improv classes or rediscover my passion for woodworking. I just existed, one awkward, silent breakfast at a time, until the quiet felt normal. We finalized the paperwork in a lawyer's office that smelled like printer toner and unwashed suits. Judith looked well-rested. She wore the same expression you give a dentist when they ask if you've been flossing regularly. Composed, mildly guilty, uninterested in elaboration. We signed, nodded, and she said, "I hope this wasn't too hard on you." I said, "Well, Judith, you did your best to make it interesting." That was the last full sentence I spoke to her. Afterward, I did what all the emotionally avoidant men of my generation do when dealing with life transitions. I rearranged my bookshelves, tossed out the ones we bought together because they looked good on the coffee table, and kept the ones I actually read. I donated the throw pillows that made me itch and unsubscribed from the joint streaming account. New password, new queue, no shared watch history. People asked what happened. I gave them the short version. We were going in different directions. Not a lie, just incomplete. They nodded, the way people do when they don't want details. Everyone thinks they want the truth until it starts sounding like a poorly written sitcom script with too many Thursdays. Eventually, Dennis faded from conversation. I assume he's still enthusiastically explaining wood grain to unsuspecting homeowners. Judith probably keeps her calendar cleaner now. Color-coded, maybe. Efficient. There's no grand moral to this story. No final moment where I gaze out over a hilltop and declare that everything happens for a reason. Sometimes, things just end. Not because of some cosmic lesson, but because one person makes a bunch of small decisions they pretend don't count, until they do. What I learned is simpler than all that. You can spend years trying to keep something together, adjusting your expectations like furniture in a cramped room. But once the foundation starts creaking under excuses and bad faith, it doesn't matter how nice the curtains are. The structure's shot. Judith didn't break me. She gave me an opportunity to exit something dishonest without having to invent a reason. I got to walk out without slamming the door. And honestly, that's better than most endings. Now, I work. I sleep better. I buy cheap furniture without approval. I keep the place a little too cold and no one complains. It's not a victory parade. It's not reinvention. It's just mine. And that, after all the Thursday appointments and passive smiles and calendar gymnastics, feels like enough. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel